At an event earlier this month in California, President Trump's 2020 campaign manager, Brad Parscale, insisted that Trump's political influence will last long after the president is out of office.
The Trumps will be a dynasty that will last for decades, propelling the Republican Party into a new party, one that will adapt to changing cultures, one who must continue to adapt while keeping the conservative values that we believe in.
But it is not clear which of the president's three eldest children will take that throne. In his latest piece for The Atlantic, McKay Coppins details the ongoing battle among the Trump children about who will act as heir to their father. He writes, quote, Ivanka was always Trump's favorite, but Don Jr. is emerging as his natural successor. McKay joins me from Washington. He's a staff writer for The Atlantic. McKay, thank you so much for being with us. Fascinating article, brilliant read, really enjoyed reading it. I'm just curious, though, how did you go about reporting this story? How were you able to source such intimate details about Trump family dynamics?
Yeah, I spent several months reporting this story. As I write in the piece, I spoke to dozens of people close to the family. The president and his children didn't want to be interviewed for reasons that are fairly obvious. This is a sensitive subject, and the question of succession and who will be the inheritor of the president's political legacy is a touchy one. But this is a family that's very famous, very powerful, and has had ripple effects throughout the president's orbit. And so I spoke to a number of people about this succession battle that I think has higher stakes than a lot of people might realize.
So give us some context and some background. What was the relationship between the president and his eldest children prior to the 2016 election? You describe a certain hothouse environment that they were raised in that has sort of set the stage for what we're seeing today, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, think about how strange this is. His three oldest children grew up in a tower that had their last name stamped across it on the outside. They grew up in Trump Tower with a very famous, very powerful father, and they were sort of surrounded by the trappings of dynasty. And Donald Trump kind of cultivated a Darwinian dynamic within the family. I write about how when they would go on ski trips and race each other down the mountain, Donald Trump would use his pole to jab at them so that he could get ahead of them. He would teach his children not to trust anyone ever, and then he would test them by asking them, do you trust me? And if they said yes, he would reprimand them.
Right.
This was the kind of world that they lived in, and that environment has kind of informed the way that they've grown up.
And what was fascinating about your piece is that you write about discussing Ivanka and Jared, and first Ivanka, but then of course when she marries Jared, you describe sort of the rise and the sort of fall of Ivanka and Jared, and the sort of decline at the beginning of Don Jr. and his rise as you see it now. When and how did you observe Ivanka begin to lose favor with her father?
Well, Ivanka was always the heir apparent and kind of the golden child before the family business changed to politics. When it was about real estate and television and licensing deals, it was widely assumed that Ivanka would be the next face of the family empire. But what happened is Ivanka and Jared went into the White House and kind of quickly found themselves out of their depth. They were in a White House, to be fair, that had rampant infighting, was very difficult to maneuver in. But what I report is that while they had some early victories, over time the president began to tire of the kind of incessant lobbying that was coming from Ivanka and Jared, where they were constantly trying to change his mind on various positions, trying to get his attention for things that maybe were not totally in step with the Trump base, and kind of quickly found themselves on the outs. Meanwhile, Don Jr. went out and kind of built his own grassroots fan base, and you see him out there campaigning across the country. He really kind of commands the MAGA faithful. He is kind of like his father, almost to the point where it seems like he's practiced his mannerisms in the mirror. And he's, I quote a number of high-profile, important Republican officials who say that they think that Don Jr. really has a bright political future.
Yeah, you describe a sort of beginning with his father, where his father sort of sends him away, almost in exile, and Don Jr. was sort of forced to forge his own path with the Republican base, which he did so quite successfully, and hence was able to rise in his father's eyes. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. And especially I think that as the president has sort of gotten closer to this re-election campaign, he started to notice, even if it was a little begrudgingly, that his son, his eldest son, whatever he has thought of him and whatever their relationship was in the past, is really a useful political tool at this point. You can send Don Jr. out on the road and rally and rile up the crowds in the way that Donald Trump would do if he was there. You can't necessarily do the same with Ivanka and Jared.
And given all of this, who do you believe the president currently views as his heir? And is that anointment still in play?
Well, you know, I think that what's happened over the last 2 years is that the president has been confronted with the reality that he might not have complete control over who inherits his political legacy. He might still wish that it was Ivanka for all kinds of reasons, but the voters are the ones who ultimately end up getting to decide this when it comes to a political dynasty, and Don Jr. is the one with all the momentum there.
Certainly within his base, correct?
That's right.
All right. Well, McKay Coppins, thank you so much for joining us. Great talking with you.
Thank you.